Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Travis Terry. I'm the president of Capalino. I'm the lucky person who gets to moderate today's important panel discussion on what New York can do to speed the city's recovery and inclusive growth. You know, as for many months, we have been covering the future of New York through our events, and in particular, focusing on actions that you and your organization can take to empower your role in helping our city thrive. I've talked a lot recently about my confidence in New York's ability to successfully recover. And I just want to point out that a main reason for my confidence is the knowledge that there are so many talented people working day and night to make it happen. I want to give a special shout out to the Capalino team, where every day through our strategic planning, lobbying, real estate, sustainability, social impact, and finance work, we are helping clients do remarkable things. And I'm so proud of the way the staff is committed to being socially responsible and charitable and focusing on their communities. And in addition to leadership, we have these three wonderful people today: Melva Miller, Gregg Bishop, and Joey Ortiz. These are extraordinary people who I personally believe, when the history books are written about New York City, how we thrived in the 2020s, it's hard to say it's 2020s, and overcame the COVID pandemic. They must have their stories told because their leadership is so vital and effective. So let me just give a quick introduction. My good friend Melva Miller is currently the CEO of the Association for a Better New York, or ABNY, which as many of you know, and has had a lot of experience in helping New York through tough times. Prior to being CEO, Melva oversaw the public-private partnership that ABNY ran to get people to sign on to the census, which is not easy during a pandemic, and was deputy borough president for the borough of Queens. Sorry, Joey and Gregg, but I should say the best borough in the city of New York, right, Melva? And executive director of the Suffren Boulevard Business Improvement District. Gregg Bishop is currently the interim executive director at Coro, New York, a nonprofit which trains individuals on how to become effective civic leaders. Full disclosure, I am on the board of Coro, New York, and have really enjoyed Gregg's leadership over the last couple months. Previously, Gregg served as the commissioner of the New York City Department of Small Business Services, helping small businesses secure capital, certifying MWBEs, and overseeing the city's job placement programs. He's also held senior roles at NPower, Oxygen Media, TheStreet.com, and Vibe Magazine. Joey Ortiz is the CEO of the New York City Employment and Training Coalition, which is the voice of New York's workforce development community and the largest coalition of city-based workforce development partners in the country, with over 180 members providing 500,000 jobs to New Yorkers. He previously was the managing director of external affairs partnerships and business development at Pursuit, and oversaw programming at the 92nd Street Y. Greetings to all of you. I should also just mention Melva, Gregg, and Joey all sit on a number of board of directors and have won many, and rightfully so, awards. They're too long to list, otherwise I would filibuster the entire event. So again, thank you for joining us today. This topic is a really, really important one. It's about inclusive growth. So what is inclusive growth? I took some time, looked up the definition. The best one that I saw, the simplest one I saw, was from the International Organization for Economic Cooperative and Development, which is a coalition of 37 countries around the world, including the United States, that inclusive growth is defined as economic growth that is distributed fairly across society, creates opportunities for all. For me, that means making sure that we all take the responsibility to ensure that everybody has the opportunity to fulfill their God-given talent, regardless of race, religion, sexual orientation, immigration status, or economic condition. Now, a lot of these solutions come down to government actions. There's no question about that. But, and I know this sounds a little JFK and asking what you could do for your country, private citizens, nonprofit organizations, businesses, and companies also need to play an important role to make sure we recover and recover fairly. we can't just rely on government to solve all of our problems. Fortunately, I couldn't be more excited to have Melva, Gregg, and Joey here to educate us on how to do that. So let's get right into it. Just a quick administrative thing. Before I ask the first question, I do want to remind our audience that this panel will last about an hour. If you have a question, please put it in the Q&A chat box at the bottom of your screen. We will be reviewing those, and I will incorporate those audience questions toward the end. So let's get started. I'd like to ask each of the panelists to share in a quick minute or two what your respective organization is doing to help the city recover and recover fairly. Melva, why don't we start with you, because I read your op-ed in Cranes recently, and it really inspired a lot of the subject matter for this discussion, and wanted to hear your thoughts.
Sure. Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Travis. And thank you for allowing me to be on this panel with my esteemed colleagues that I've enjoyed working with over the years. This is absolutely an all-star panel, and I've learned so much from both of these gentlemen. It's just an honor to sit here on this panel and talk about an inclusive recovery for the city and make sure that we continue to grow the city that we love, but in a way that incorporates all of New Yorkers. For those who don't know, the Association for a Better New York, affectionately known as ABNY, was started in the 70s in a very similar environment that we're in now during the fiscal crisis of the 70s. And a bunch of civically minded leaders across the city came together, led by Lou Rudin, and said, you know, let's do our part to make sure that this city survives this crisis. And over the years, the organization has been involved in a number of civic activities, and, you know, including, you know, in the 70s, prepaying their property taxes so that the city had a wealth of cash to work with, sending their private sanitation crews on the street to clean up the street when there was a sanitation crisis. And over the years, we have continued to do these types of initiatives. You know, basically, you know, ABNY is a nonprofit organization, and that we convene, we mobilize, we coalition build, and we activate the region's public and private partners to talk about ways that we can continuously grow this great city that we love. And we do this with the private sector, the public sector, with labor. You know, if you look at our membership, we are a membership organization of about 300 members that run the gamut of different sectors. And as we step into sort of the fiscal crisis of 2020 and 2021, you know, the mission remains the same, but how we do this and our perspective has just changed, right? So that we are staying relevant and we are responding to the needs of the day. So, you know, when we think about sort of the gamut of how do we recover in this city, there's really three components that we've really been concentrating on. And that's looking at sort of the people who make up the city of New York, making sure, and we'll hear more about sort of workforce development from Joey, but making sure that the people can thrive. We're talking about communities, right? You know, New York City is a city of different communities, very diverse communities, but how do we make sure that we are continuously investing in these communities to make sure that we are growing, that we are attracting industry, that we are attracting people, and that people can afford to live here, that people can afford to grow here, the businesses can afford to grow here, and we're doing it inclusively. And then the third is making sure that we stay a hub of innovation in terms of sectors and business, and really investing in not only making sure that the larger employers want to continue to be here, but that we're really supporting the small local businesses and the smaller industries and the entrepreneurs. Because, you know, entrepreneurs start businesses because they love this place, they love the city. It's a movement from the heart. So how do we make sure that they have the tools? And I'm sure Gregg is going to talk about all of the things that can support small businesses. But in this moment of time, we are really looking at these three anchors to support the city's growth and continuous growth, and make sure that we do it from a lens and a perspective that is diverse, equitable, and comprehensive.
Great. Thank you, Melva. That was really great clarity on all the great things Avenue's doing. Appreciate it. Gregg, love to hear a little bit. I know you have such a wide variety of experiences that I know are going to fit purposely and perfectly into this. So I'd
Yeah.
love to hear a little bit more about Coro and your experiences at SBS.
Yeah, so thanks for having me, Travis. And again, as Melva said, Joe, it's good to see you. It's always good to see familiar faces, because I know that everyone has put in a lot of their time and effort to make the city a better place. So a lot is happening at Coro. Actually, today we're going to make a major announcement. I'm not going to steal a thunder, but look. Yeah, I know. So look out for that. But for those who don't know, Coro New York Leadership Center, we have been around since the 80s. We're one of the premier leadership centers here in New York City, focused on creating better leaders, because our belief is that leadership matters. And what Melva was talking about, and I'm sure what Joey's going to talk about, when you think about the crisis and when you think about the country, we've seen what failed leadership can do in the middle of a crisis. And it's important for our leaders, not only regardless of ideology, to be able to work together and really focus on coming together with a solution. And so when Coro was created, actually we're a national organization back in about 40 years ago, actually a little bit longer than 40 years. The threat to our democracy was other types of communism, totalitarian government. It was a rise of those type of governments. And the thought process was that if we bring the private sector, the public sector, the nonprofit sector together, we can then help everyone understand why it's important to work together to actually, preserve our democracy. Now, our democracy has its challenges, and we know that. And that's the work that we do at Coro, is to uncover those challenges, the historic racism that's built into our systems, the fact that white supremacy now has risen to become a threat to our democracy. I only need to go back now to January 6th to demonstrate why, if we do not create leaders who understand how power and privilege, who understands that when we talk about building an anti-racist society, we're not being partisan. We're just talking about protecting our democracy and ensuring that all individuals in our community are impacted equitably, right? And that's the word that we focus on, is equitable. And so we are excited. This year we're doing for the first ever a conference. And I forgot who said this, but never waste a pandemic. As tragic as the pandemic has been, it's caused us to be innovative. So instead of the typical galas, and we have decided to launch an actual leadership conference that's open to all New Yorkers, and that individuals can learn from the best minds across the city, tackling specific topics such as, how do we increase voter participation? We have a problem here in New York City where we have our mayoral race coming up, and our last mayoral race, only 17%, not even 50%, 17% of eligible New Yorkers went out and voted. People have died for the right to vote, and we live in a city where people are not exercising their right to vote. So how do we increase voter participation? We look at the budget, and how do we create an equitable budget here in New York City? We're going to look at housing. We're going to look at a number of different things. So I'll drop the, if actually it's in the chat right now, you can click on a link and you can actually sign up. But we run specific programs like Leadership New York for mid and senior level career executives. Applications are open right now, where we bring everyone together from all these sectors to tackle some of these major issues across the city. I'm an alum of Leadership New York 21, and I did this program about 10 years ago at SBS, and the work that we did at Small Business Services, I will say, was influenced a lot by what I learned in Coro, because we always thought about equity. And when I became commissioner, I created a strategic plan called Equity of Opportunity, looking at how we deliver our city services in an equitable manner. So it's not just good enough to have courses to help businesses figure out how to actually grow their business. It's important for us to understand that if someone lives in the Rockaways, that we need to actually reach them where they're at instead of making them travel 2 hours, right? That's the challenge when we look at city services. You know, when we look at capital, how do we empower our CDFIs, our community development financial institutions, to help address the challenge of capital for, you know, our Black and brown businesses who have challenges getting your traditional loans? So there's a number of different things that, you know, I implemented when I was the commissioner of small business services. And I'm looking forward to talk about just the city itself and what we really need to do to ensure that our small businesses, which really and truly are the economic engine of the city, actually recovers in an equitable manner. We know that, you know, corporations are here. We saw Google is expanding their space, et cetera. But we have to make sure that our small businesses, including our vendors, our street vendors, et cetera, are a part of the recovery.
Thank you, Greg. Very, very helpful, and strongly encourage folks to go to the Coro conference later this month. There's some fantastic speakers and you'll learn a lot. Joey, love to turn it over to you, hear a little bit about what NYC ETC is working on. You were part of an inclusive growth initiative that sounds really exciting, really important. So please, I would love to please share what you guys are thinking, what you're working on, ideas, et cetera. Thank you.
Thanks, Travis, and good afternoon to everyone joining. It's a real pleasure to be with you today, and thank you for that kind introduction. I really admire the three of you, and it's an honor to be here with you. NYC ETC, just to give a little bit more color into the organization, as you mentioned earlier, we're a workforce-based organization, an association that represents 180 member organizations providing job training to over 500,000 New Yorkers. And our mission is pretty clear. It's just to ensure that every New Yorker always has access to the necessary skills, training, and education for them to thrive in the economy, and that every business in New York City has a highly skilled workforce. So our work falls into a number of different areas, but we convene stakeholders across the entire system. We discover and develop innovative solutions to create an interconnected and more effective workforce. And all of that is meant to inform our advocacy to ensure that we have a more equitable workforce development policy system and investments at all levels of government. And so we, fundamentally believe that the city and a true recovery here in New York City for all New Yorkers means that we're being very intentional about how we invest in people, communities, and the systems that support all of the New Yorkers and their families, especially those New Yorkers that have systemic barriers that are distinguished by race, gender, socioeconomic status, et cetera. And back to work, everyone gets back to work in good quality jobs that they can continue to maintain and continue to grow in. So for a little bit of context, back around this time last year, it was pretty clear to all of us that we needed to build back better, which has become the more common terminology. And in order to build a more effective city, that we were going to have to reskill an entire population that was falling out of the workforce as a result of the severe economic losses and closures of businesses. So we spearheaded the formation of a group that actually our friends at Abney participated in, which we called the New York Workforce Recovery Strategy Group. And it was an organized effort of over 80 leaders from the private and nonprofit sectors, including job training providers, labor unions, small and large businesses and associations, human service organizations, advocates, and think tanks. And it was an opportunity to create a space for a discussion on how we could grow more effectively in the future. And the product was a really phenomenal report that we continue to be very proud of, which was called Recovery for All, which centered on 4 very distinct pillars. And those were education and training, of course, that being a key focus of our organization, and focusing on displaced workers and marginalized communities. The second was around rebuilding through public works and direct public employment. The third, relief programs for individuals in hard-hit communities. And the fourth was around recovery for local businesses and support for new business development. So we're really proud of that effort, and it continues to inform our strategies on how to move the city forward today. But additionally, as you mentioned, and I'll talk more about this, we've also more recently launched what we're calling is the New York City Inclusive Growth Initiative. That is a project that's done in partnership with the Association for Neighborhood Housing and the Regional Plan Association. I know you had our friend Tom Wright on some time ago.
Yeah,
And it's a project that's funded generously by the Ford Foundation, the Robin Hood Foundation, and JP Morgan Chase in order to create a new space for a new discussion around what growth can look like in the city that's anchored on economic development, workforce development, and housing, but it's also informed by other areas where there's intersectionality and other areas that often many folks in New York are struggling with, and might determine whether or not they can grow equitably in New York City, or whether or not they might be supportive of economic growth in the city. So that's, issues like food security and infrastructure, whether or not they can, start a small business in their community, or whether they have a disability and accessibility issues are concerned. Lots of other things, including race and social justice. And so we've selected a steering committee, and I'll talk a little bit more about that, but we're really excited about the work that's coming out of that as well.
Thank you, Joey. That's really appreciate that. So I want to spend a couple minutes on actions. We have an audience of people, and I'll tell you, we at Capalino have a number of clients who are saying, how can we help? What can we do? So I want to get your insights on that. Melva, I was struck. Abney did this great series on Black leadership earlier last year, and Darren Walker, from the president of the Ford Foundation, was talking. And he talked about how when his father was growing up and had a job, I'm forgetting the name of the company, he was paid in part through stock options, and those stock options was an asset, created wealth, and that stuck with him his entire life. And that companies have started to get away from that type of thinking. So I'm wondering whether, if we were to put together a list of things that companies can do to help ensure not just good economic recovery, but inclusive economic recovery, what are those actions? Stock options. Joey, do I give everybody your phone number so they can call you to find people to hire? Help me out here. I mean, if we would put together a list and promote it, let's go to work. Anybody want to start that? Gregg, Joey? First?
I mean, sorry, Melvin, do you want to keep, because I literally was about to start a list. When you think about recovery, It cannot be government alone, right? Obviously, companies have to participate in recovery. And let's take Target's recent announcement as an example, the commitment of spending $2 billion with Black-owned businesses. And that's the type of commitment we need to start seeing with the private sector. We need to see the private sector be bold and very direct. And when I say direct, meaning specific, right? Because when you look at your traditional, and I'm just talking procurement in general, we always talk about minority and women, and minority spans a number of groups. But specifically when we look at the impact that COVID-19 has had, it's the Black and Latino communities that's been impacted the most. And we know traditionally there's a history of racism that's built into our financial markets. When you were talking about in the 70s, early 70s, a Black consumer could not buy a piece of property in Long Island. And wealth is created by home ownership. And that's how a lot of people have started their businesses. We need to be aggressive, and we need to say, okay, we're going to help, Black-owned businesses. We're going to help, Hispanic-owned businesses, Asian-owned businesses. There's a number of things. So companies need to be, specific in terms of and deliberate in terms of their ability to take their purchasing power and direct some of those dollars to Black and Hispanic-owned businesses and Asian-owned businesses, and they need to be transparent about that. I think companies also need to be innovative. I have a interesting story in terms of I taught myself how to code. I dropped out of college and I built. I had a whole career, 7 years working in tech. That only works if you have a skill set, but it only works as well when your HR team understands that just because someone doesn't have a 4-year degree doesn't mean that they can't learn, doesn't mean that they're not a quick learner, right? So we have to upend how we actually recruit. We have to be deliberate in terms of our recruitment. A major CEO of a major bank recently said in the past 3 months, it's hard to find diversity. And I nearly fell out of my seat, right? Because I'm just like, wait, look, maybe he needs to talk to me because I know I went to HBCU and I know a lot of smart, diverse individuals that this bank can hire. So we need to be deliberate in terms of how we address the systemic racism that not only was there prior to COVID, was amplified by COVID. And so that's the private sector. I cannot wait till we start talking about what the public sector can do, because there's a number of things that we definitely need to do as a city in terms to ensure that we have an equitable recovery. But I don't want to monopolize the time. So Joey, Melva, I don't know if you have anything else to add.
Yeah, I'll jump in. I think similar to what Gregg was talking about. There are a number of different ways, but over the last year, I think in response, obviously, to the pandemic and racial and social injustice, and that largely impacted, Black and Brown and AAPI communities, I saw companies at all scales step up in a way that I hadn't previously imagined, and it was inspiring to see, at least on the surface, because I think it was a recognition that we have a problem that is plaguing our country and it's stagnating overall economic output. But it's just the first step. And I think companies from a leadership level all the way down to their hiring teams, as Gregg mentioned, need to commit to playing an active and not passive role in the solution. So we need companies to move beyond the initial pledge to hire more non-traditional candidates. We need them to take a long, hard look at their company culture, look at whether there's an institutional bias in hiring practices that have actively eliminated entire communities from consideration. Or is this individual hiring bias, or is on teams, or is it both? And we need them to work with experts and community leaders to reform these practices that research has already proven time and time and again will increase productivity and performance of their teams and lead to stronger economic gains for their owners and shareholders. I have countless other things I could share as well, but I'd love to jump in.
Yeah, I think this conversation could go on for like 4 or 5 hours, but we'll do our best to be concise.
You don't want to get me started.
Go ahead, Melva, sorry.
Yeah, no. So yeah, no, exactly both what Gregg said and also what Joey said, but Gregg's point about sort of how companies recruit, right? Because when we're talking about the private sector, we're not just talking about the for-profit, we're also talking about the nonprofit sector as well. And in thinking about sort of how to diversify and have an intentional effort to make sure that not only your company or your business or your nonprofit reflects the community you serve, but you have a real commitment, right? You have a real commitment to diversity. And when we're talking about we talk about equality, and we're talking about sort of equitable growth, and we're talking about equitable economic development, we're really talking about unlocking the full potential of the local economy, right? And we do this by dismantling barriers, right? Expanding opportunities. And this has to be a conscious effort, right? Like this just can't be, we can't find it. We can help you find the talent. We can help you find the potential within your own organization, but you have to have a deliberate and conscious intention to look for it in this. It has to be people-centric. When we think about how we grow our economy, we have to think about, looking at sort of how it influences the lives of people first. And, we can talk about economic development strategies, and we can talk about place-based strategies, right? But when we're talking about making sure that these things are really equitable, we are really talking about making sure that it is people-centric. And I think when in a place like New York City, when you're focused on that, then you will see that diversity within the private sector, whether again it's for-profit or nonprofit. And the full recovery of the city will only depend on the meaningful participation in these organizations, in the plan, right? In the implementation of new policies that will dismantle structural obstacles and barriers, right? It will only change when there's meaningful participation in the oversight process of any intervention that affects the people who have been disenfranchised and disconnected from opportunities. But there are absolutely things that the private sector can do, but it starts with the intention and understanding that these things exist, and then taking steps. And we can go through those steps again. I don't want to monopolize. We only have half an hour left. Talk about
Melva,
things.
I really want to emphasize on that point that you just made. That's why leadership is so important, because the next mayor needs to be able to sit at the table with the CEOs of all the companies that's here in New York City and work together. It cannot be this us against them sort of, mentality that we've had over the past couple of years. The private sector wants to help, and the city is uniquely positioned to actually have the infrastructure to help, but everyone has to work together.
Right.
Greg, that's so true. I just want to sort of underscore too that, we have clients coming to us all the time asking how we can help, and we usually divert them to your organizations. But, Greg, just because you touched on it, and Melva and Joey, you talked about this too, but let's talk about how government can hold companies accountable through carrots and sticks, for lack of a better term, right? And what could we be doing to incentivize companies to access diverse talent, but also hold them accountable if they don't? Let's talk a little bit about some of those action steps. I'd love to, you did some of this, I know, Greg, in the city.
Yeah, just really quickly, I would say that, first of all, again, we just need to have a discussion, right? One of the things that we did at SPS, and a lot of credit goes to Maria Torres Springer, even Deputy Mayor Alicia Glenn, when we created the industry partnerships, the goal was to sit with industry, find out exactly what they needed, and then figure out how we can fill that gap. And so we sat down with, the heads of corporations, especially tech companies, and said, what's happening? Why are you not hiring CUNY graduates? Why are you going all the way up to Canada to find talent when right in our backyard in Queens, we are producing the most, could be the largest number of computer science graduates ever. And then tech companies are struggling with diversity. Well, guess who has the most diverse student body? CUNY. So literally, there's a number of things that we can do, but we first have to be able to sit down at the table and then figure out how we could build partnerships. So that's the carrot. It's really, government has the resources. And when I say the resources, the infrastructure, we have the universities, we have, a number of organizations that we fund. So we have the tentacles, we know where the community partners are. And so we can help with putting together the partnerships and connecting the dots. The other thing I would say is that we have to also hold companies accountable. When we do these deals where we provide tax incentives, we've got to be able to be transparent, because one of the challenges, and I think what you're seeing right now is, and this is probably one of the reasons why the Amazon deal collapsed, the promises of jobs, it's only as good as what you can deliver. And if there's a history in a community where companies come in and there's these promises of jobs, and the community, they don't actually see the realization of that, then the next time you come in and said there's going to be more jobs, what is it? Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me, right? So we've got to be, and the only way you can develop trust is by transparency. So when we talk to these companies, we've got to let these companies know you've got to deliver, and we've got to have, transparent reporting to the public so they know that there are things happening. It's the same thing with affordable housing. The reason why that we have this affordable housing issue is during the Bloomberg administration, there wasn't sort of that accountability and transparency to hold these developers accountable to deliver what they're supposed to. So again, it goes back to, and I think the stick is really transparency.
Yeah, and if I can just jump in there, I think Greg is actually right? How do you incentivize the private sector from doing the right thing? And government really has the tool. And the private sector wants to do the right thing, right? They see the value in diversifying not only sort of their employee base, but also their procurement opportunities, right? They see the value in the services that, the city provides. Like one example is, while I was Deputy Borough President of Queens and we were attracting developers to the borough with retailers, right? The Department of Small Business Services, through their Workforce One and Business Solution Center, had programs, free services for businesses that will recruit and train and screen, all for free, right? So there are incentives and ways that government can help sort of companies do the right thing, but they want to do the right thing. So it's about bringing them to the table. It's about having the conversation with the private sector to let them know the tools and resources that are available. And then the intention is always good, but it is then the oversight, right? It is then that accountability. Once you receive the benefits from the public sector, how do we make sure not only that they are living up to their commitment, but sometimes you have to be creative and nimble. Sometimes, the needs change and we have to be able to be flexible and change them with the times, right? Because a policy or an initiative that worked even 2 years ago, it's not going to work today because of, what we're seeing. So, it's about having that relationship between the public and private sector, having that trust and a continuous dialogue, because the government can offer something as well as the private sector. So how do we come together to make sure that we are doing what's best for not only the city, but everyone who lives in the city?
Yeah.
So Joey, let's play, if money wasn't an issue and we were to create the perfect policy to address, and I'm getting a few questions in the Q&A about budgets. And if we were to make a perfect workforce development policy that could really help ensure that everybody has opportunities to jobs, curious to get your thoughts on kind of what that would look like. It'd be great to get a vision that we could all just sort of rally around and fight for, and just to make sure that it gets back to talent, make sure everybody who can really express their talent and be successful.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that there's one specific policy,
I
but
figure it was simple.
But I guess I'd start by saying, here within our organization, and I touched on this before, we believe that there are three very distinct pillars in order to create an effective workforce development system, and that's investing in people, community, and systems. So the first one with people, it's really ensuring that when we're investing in improving the lives of all New Yorkers and improving their ability to access economic opportunity through development, expansion, and the full funding of training models and upskilling programs that connect New Yorkers to essential and growth sectors. That's the first part. The second is community. We need to ensure that when we are developing, that we are aligning workforce development to that development. That's in process, that's in practice, and ensuring that every person within that economic development project has access to the jobs that are being created and for the ability for their business to grow as well. And then the third is the system. I mean, the system is so fractured right now, but it includes education, job training, employment services, economic development, industry partnerships, community partnerships, the Workforce Development Board. And we need to increase visibility and access and alignment across all of those areas within that. And I think if we don't take that approach or a similar one, we can't build back better. We're going to continue to see a large number of New Yorkers left out of the economic recovery. And more specifically, I think the things that we see as some specific policy priorities or recommendations would be investing. This is something that we talked about for a very long time within the coalition. Investing in on-ramps. There's a significant number of New Yorkers, and increasingly so as a result of the pandemic, that just don't have access, or they are not ready for job training. They lack certain skills. They have certain numeracy or digital or ESOL deficits, language deficits. And in order to meet the increased demand of industries, we need to upskill this particular population so they can access job training and employment. We need to close the digital poverty gap. This is a huge issue, and it's increasingly an issue as a result of the pandemic. You simply cannot earn or learn from home if you don't have quality broadband or the necessary hardware and software in order to access the system. And I think one, more innovative solution that we, care very deeply about is, and it would address the lack of funding that exists for programs that are not supported by federal workforce development funds that have been declining for decades now, is a flexible and dedicated workforce development fund for programs that provides, sustainable long-term funding for employment and training programs across all agencies and initiatives. And there's a number of examples in different cities and states across the nation that have developed this in a way that is not negatively impacting businesses and negatively impacting growth, but it provides a sustainable fund for job training so that folks can access the employment opportunities that exist in their cities.
Yeah, I mean, what Joey is talking about is so crucial. The system is broken, and the next mayor needs to be able to address that. When you have the agency that's responsible for, not only, job training, but also entrepreneurship in one portfolio, separate and apart from the agency that's responsible for creating economic activity in the city, it's in another portfolio, separate and apart from, Department of Education in another portfolio, you have chaos, right?
Yeah.
So you need to figure out a way, and I would make a recommendation that the Office of Workforce Development report to the first deputy mayor instead of any other deputy mayor, because that first deputy mayor has the ability to coordinate all the other agencies. But more importantly, when you think about, do I get someone the skills that they need? Do I invest in them and provide them the services like Joey's talking about to get them a job, or do I help them start a business? Those two things have a direct correlation with reduction in crime, right? And so if we're talking about brass tacks, the agency that's responsible for helping people find jobs, helping people build businesses, their budget is $100 million. The agency that's responsible for dealing with crime, their budget is $6 billion, right? So what are we doing here, right? We need to shift our priorities and make more investments to get more people jobs, so that way they're earning a decent living, and therefore you're addressing a number of other issues in terms of the dependency on government, in terms of just crime, in terms of a number of different things that you can certainly solve by helping people start businesses and earn a decent living wage.
And Travis, I'm sorry, I'm going to jump in here. I know
Yeah,
you probably
please.
want to so
no, please. I'm excited to learn.
And so I'm going to take this from sort of a policy recommendation and sort of government and take it to process and more in a local view, right? And what we need to start seeing more of, right, and hopefully we can see this through the next administration, is how does this play out on the local level, right? How do we take a comprehensive look that is unique and tailored to specific communities? Because there are great programs, right? They could be the best program that's out there, but it might not fit exactly for for every community that you see across the city. So where you have, one community where, you want to prioritize whether it's workforce development and training, and that you want to, prioritize opportunities for small businesses, right? Public safety might be the #1 priority, right? So how do you have a discussion on the local level where you are prioritizing and you are customizing the solutions using the tools that are available for that neighborhood in a catalog of resources and programs and initiatives that are offered by the city? So my recommendation is that the approaches have to be unique. They have to be comprehensive to a community, because things don't happen in a silo, right? They happen, things are, often, especially what we're seeing there, it's the intersection of a lot of sort of issues and barriers that we're seeing in communities. So how do we come up with strategies that uniquely address the concerns of specific neighborhoods, using the policies that were talked about, using the initiatives and programs that are out there, but customizing them for the unique positions in these communities?
Yeah, you're so right. And it's also an economic, development solution too. I mean, I was struck by The Citigroup last year released a study that concluded that racism has cost the United States $16 trillion over the last 20 years. And McKinsey issued a study that concluded the nation's GDP could be 6% higher by 2028 if we really start to close the racial wealth gap. So it's, it's just such smart policy to start thinking about these things. Before, I want to change subjects a little bit and spend some time on small business. We touched on this a little bit, but I also wanted to get, your advice. We have a lot of struggling small businesses out there as a result of the pandemic. Particularly those owned by women, minorities, and immigrants. And I would, since we're list building, would love your ideas too about what can we tell these small businesses to help them kind of take advantage of the likely economic recovery that's coming.
Gregg, I don't know why you're sitting there quiet.
I know.
I was trying to be patient because
if ever there was a lead up to Gregg Bishop.
I know. I was like, okay, let me not be the person that always.
How much time do we have?
But right. So a couple of things, right? And I spoke of this on I was on a forum on Clubhouse recently, and I was like, so the preface is I'm not running for mayor. There's already too many candidates. But if I were running for mayor, and I had
Gregg, there's still a couple months, so you got time.
So here's the thing, small businesses, and again, I always go back, they are the economic engine. There's a reason why you look at different boroughs and see what's happening and the activity that's happening, and the fact that people are working from home in the outer boroughs, some small businesses are thriving. I know there was a recent report in Jackson Heights, Queens, for example, like rents are still appreciating because of the fact that, those businesses are doing well. Whereas if you look at Midtown Manhattan, where the core of Manhattan, those businesses aren't doing so well. So if I were looking at as a city, one, I want to make sure that I champion New York as a business-friendly, city. That's number one. So we just need a mayor that cares a lot about not only small businesses, but all businesses, number one. Number two, we also need to focus on where are the pain points for small businesses. So the biggest challenge for small businesses is workforce and actual hard costs. So rent and people. So let's figure out how we can actually give some type of tax incentive for our small businesses who have been able to keep their employees on. We may have to work with the state, and this is why we also need a mayor that can work with the governor, whoever the governor will be, to incentivize the fact that they've actually either kept their employees or they will continue to keep their employees. We need to look at how we get in the way as a city for small businesses. So I would actually encourage a 2-year or even a 4-year, a cure period for all violations. So meaning if you ever get a violation, unless it's safety or health related, you have the opportunity to fix it. What that means is that somebody at OMB is going to have to figure out how to recover of the revenue that will be lost, right? Because the way the city budget is based, a lot of revenue that is running a lot of programs at city agency is dependent on fines to small businesses. We have to get out of the business of depending on fining small business on that revenue stream to run the city. We also need, and this is why I could never be mayor, we also need to tackle the property tax system, right? Because our small businesses are carrying the burden of our property taxes. Most landlords, it's a triple net lease. They pass the property tax increases to the small businesses. And we know that there's an inequality in our property tax system. What it means is that our mixed use buildings are carrying most of the tax burdens, and that's where you'll find the small businesses. What it also means is that our single family homes are not. And what that translates, and somebody from Department of Finance will probably correct me, but I certainly think that the reason why no one has touched this is because it means if you wanted to have an equitable tax system, you may have to raise property tax on single family homes. Those are the people who vote. So that is probably one of the reasons why this has always been a third rail for every single mayor. The last person that took a look and tried to change this was Bloomberg, and he almost lost the second term. So we've got to do a number of things. And the last thing I would say is that we've got to make it easier just to do business in the city. Our tech infrastructure, these things are not pretty, right? Bloomberg never ran and said, I'm going to build a third water tunnel, right? Nobody knew that this was something that needed to be done, but it got done. I guarantee you, if that second water tunnel something had happened and half of New York City had lost water, Bloomberg would have been crucified. Well, we have a tech infrastructure that's on the verge of collapsing. And the reason why I know this is because when you try to start a business, you've got to go to so many different agencies because our systems are not talking to each other. We've had so many failed attempts to try to bring our systems together, but we've got to be able to figure out how, once and for all, how to make it easier for all these agencies to talk to each other. So when I am ready to start a business, I just need to go to one place and then everything else falls in line. And it doesn't take me 60 or 90 days to start a business.
Are you sure you don't want to run for mayor?
We tried to get that. We tried to get that. And I'm just going to add really quickly, absolutely, we have to be more business friendly. We have to be more business friendly for smaller businesses, taking a book out of social workers, right? Something that I've seen, when I was director of economic development for the borough, right? We have to bring it to the businesses. And I know the city had tried, there were programs where the city tried to do this through business solution centers, but we have to bring the services to businesses and make it easier. But overall, the first thing we have to do is make sure that we are on top of COVID relief, right? We have to get the city moving again, right? I think that's the biggest way we are going to support small businesses. To Gregg's point, right? We saw a lot of the small businesses and the main business corridors in the other boroughs sort of thriving better than Manhattan, but there is still work to do to make sure that people feel safe to not only come out and shop and patronize, but also to come to work, right? We have to get COVID relief under control. We need direct support for small businesses, the continuation and expanding of that. And I talked about that in my op-ed, right? Direct grants, right? We know that commercial lenders weren't lending, so we had to go to the CDFIs. How do we make sure that they have the support? Historically, those are the ones that supported those small businesses and by BIPOC communities anyway, right? Making sure that they have the resources from the feds and they have the technical assistance to get those funds to small businesses up and running. And then there's entrepreneurship and job creation, right? We have to continue to support entrepreneurs. Talked about this a lot, right? They generate the jobs. Small businesses employ more New Yorkers. We have to make sure that we are supporting them. And then some real common sense things, right? To Gregg's point, right? We have to make sure that we are not recovering the city on the backs of small businesses with fines, right? We need a moratorium on fines. There've been a lot of great proposals that have come out of a lot of the mayoral candidates' camps around small businesses, right? I think there are some good ideas there. We have to halt evictions for small businesses the way we do for residential evictions, right? Because small businesses are struggling to stay, and they're property owners, right? A lot of the property owners who house small businesses are small businesses themselves, and they need mortgage relief. But how do we make sure that we are providing legal assistance and lease assistance to small businesses? We need to also support live venues and nightclubs, right? Financial support to bring the nightlife back, because tourism is still a #1 economy of the city. And we need to make sure that we are not only supporting the larger venues, but also the smaller venues and artists that bring that creativity and that spark to the city. So there's a lot of direct common sense things we can do to support small businesses. And then the last thing I'll say, I'm sorry, sorry, Travis, we are really in tune to making sure that government procures with minority, small, local LGBT businesses. We have to do a better job incentivizing the private sector to do the same. Just make it easier to find those businesses so that they can procure goods and services from them. And that's something that ABNY is committed to do.
One of the, this topic, so the other thing, and this is why I talk about the private sector needs to be part of the sorry, Joey. Think about the financial industry. When people don't talk about this, but when you get a mortgage or when you refinance your commercial property, in your covenants, it actually tells you what type of tenant you can have in the space in order for you to get that mortgage. People are not necessarily, the financial industry needs to be part of this solution as well, because there might be a landlord out there that wants to actually rent out to a small coffee shop owner, but because that small coffee shop owner is a Black woman who has a whole bunch of student loan debt, her credit score may be artificially low. It doesn't mean she can't run a business. It just means that she just went out and did what she needed to do. But because of the terms of that loan that this landlord has, they cannot rent to that particular person. So it's a whole ecosystem, and that is why you need to have leadership in City Hall that can address all these issues, bring the brilliant minds together, and say like, hey, this is how we're going to fix this, and have the private sector be part of that solution. Sorry, Joey, I just had to get that out there.
Oh, no.
Go ahead, Joey.
No, yeah, I mean, I think, Gregg and Melva covered a lot of this, but obviously, small businesses make up the majority of New York City's workforce. And so we need to urgently do whatever we can to successfully reopen as many of those businesses as possible. And I mean, a few recommendations that haven't necessarily been mentioned, but I'll expand on it. But in particular, expanding on the workforce related ones, we need to provide, I think, incubator assistance to new businesses and to support worker co-ops. I think it's an incredible opportunity for folks to grow and to help support the recovery effort. We need to restructure the workforce system to better serve small businesses in particular, and incentivize training and employment partnerships amongst them. And expanding a little bit more on that one for a second, I think we can use smart, very targeted wage subsidy programs to support small businesses' ability to hire more inclusively and redevelop their hiring practices. But really focusing that on the most impacted workers and the most impacted small businesses here in the city. Additionally, I think we just need to figure out ways to increase the small business participation in the city's workforce system. And we can try to set a goal against that over the next 5 years to try to achieve that and help us grow more equitably. I think there's, other recommendations include increasing the capacity of small business intermediaries to actually provide workforce training services, which is something that many small businesses are lacking. They don't have the scale or the infrastructure to be able to support. And I think, in terms of the system, there are ways to increase business visibility or small business visibility and representation on things like the Workforce Development Board and advisory boards and for industry partnerships that will help them, help us illuminate a little bit more of the different needs that they're struggling with in order to address the inclusive hiring practices.
Okay, that's great. Well, let me just say we're coming up on an hour, so I want to say thank you. And one thing I would just, you've all inspired me, and one thing that sort of jumped to mind as we're talking, I would love to work with you all on is just a simple checklist of things that businesses and nonprofits. I think we tend to forget that nonprofits employ like 400,000 people in the city, but what businesses can do to really engage in an inclusive economic growth. So thank you all, and we'd love to follow up on that. In our last few minutes, it's okay. I'd like to take a little bit of moderator's privilege and amplify a couple issues, some of which have been mentioned, that I think are standing in the way of inclusive growth, and I think are important to look at in order to make sure our city recovers appropriately. The first is parks. Parks are in many ways the souls of communities. However, we've really only seen major parks being built in high wealth areas. Things like the High Line, Hudson River Park, Pier 76, the Little Park on Pier 55, Brooklyn Bridge Park. They've seen billions of dollars of investment simply because they exist in areas that frankly attract wealth and wealthy donors. It's just not right. Communities outside of Manhattan and frankly the waterfront that faces Manhattan deserve their fair share. I know some of our panelists and I have talked a little bit about this. And it's really time to start looking at new models for parks, because those play important roles in our communities. The second issue, which I haven't heard much about, but I think it's worth talking about, is historic districts. Much has been made about needs for changes in zoning. There's no question that's true. However, what people may not understand is historic districts supersede even the fairest zoning laws. This policy might have been designed with the right intent, but in reality, these historic districts are having unintended consequences and have, frankly, in many places, lowered the racial and economic diversity than as compared to non-historic districts. I will admit, in my career, I've worked on projects in these neighborhoods, and I've seen personally some very powerful, wealthy neighborhood groups, particularly, frankly, on the Lower West Side, use these landmarks laws to block schools, to block homeless shelters, affordable housing, inclusive economic development projects, and even a hospital. I have no problem with landmarking a building, but let's get real. A lot of these communities aren't opposing density or social needs in their district because the brick color is inappropriate. The third issue I would just wanted to highlight is the issue of dyslexia. We touched a little bit on education, but I personally believe that any and all education policy must focus on supporting kids with dyslexia and other learning challenges. It is not being screened, and far too often these children are being labeled as unintelligent, which creates anxiety and low self-esteem. In fact, studies have shown that perhaps up to 48% of people in prison, many of them people of color, have dyslexia. I am hopeful this will be addressed by because frankly, a number of our mayoral candidates have talked about this, and there's some smart legislation in Albany and other areas. I know there's a great piece of a bill to get everybody screened by Senator Brad Wellman to test all public school students. And the final thing I would mention is something that Gregg touched on, which is voting. It is everybody's responsibility to not only vote, but to put in every effort possible to ensure that everybody has the right to vote and the ability to vote. When democracy is allowed to thrive, everybody benefits. But there is some incredibly dangerous legislation, just like the one passed in Georgia, that target people of color and the poor. So regardless of your political feelings, we all have to fight like hell to make sure that we have a just democratic system. Sorry, I had to pontificate a little bit. I have strong feelings about these things. I and our firm, again, I'm so proud of our firm, have really tried to be a part of some of these solutions. Please let us know if you have others. Thank you all for listening. Melva, Joey, Gregg, you guys are the best. I mean, thank God you are in the positions you are. It's just, it gives me so much confidence that we're heading in the right direction. And it's just such an honor for me to be a part of this today with you all. And everybody listening, we have a lot of people listening today. Please learn more about Coro and ABNY and the New York City Employment Training Coalition. Join them, support them. Part of these Future of New Yorks is to make connections and matchmake. I'm really excited to let everybody know, I just found this out yesterday, that because of a Future of New York conversation my colleague Susan Hinkson had with Alicia Guevara from the Big Brothers Big Sisters, our very generous client UPS has agreed to sponsor and volunteer personnel to a challenge program for New York City high school students to work on real-time transportation issues in conjunction with the Department of Education. So Gregg, we've talked a lot about these connections between and public-private partnerships. That just that made me smile. That made my day. And finally, I just want to remind people that we have a number of Future of New York events in the works. We have two coming up next Tuesday, April 13th. I get to chat with two other people I adore and learn a lot from. Lillian Barrios Paoli, who's a senior advisor at Hunter College and former deputy mayor for Health and Human Services. And all of our good friend Wayne Ho, who's the president and CEO of the Chinese American Planning Council, for a discussion on modernizing the social service sector. There are a few questions that were asked today in the Q&A about social services. We're going to get into all that stuff because that's got an economic component as well. The link to register is in the chat. You can also visit our website at capalino.com. Melva, Gregg, Joey, again, I can't thank you so much. I would love offline to start talking about this checklist to give to everybody in our respective communities about how businesses really engage in making sure that we recover fairly.
Let's
So,
do
yeah.
it.
Let's do that. I love that idea. Let's do that now. Right
Sounds
now.
good. Check your emails in about 3 minutes.
Thanks, Travis.
Thanks for
All
having
right.
me.
Thank you, everyone, for joining. We'll see you soon.
Thanks
Take care.
everyone.